Hello, welcome to the video. Last weekend I got to compete in the Vintage Showcase Qualifier, a somewhat prestigious Magic Online tournament, winner of which gets an invite to Magic Online Champion Showcase, which is a nice 8-person tournament with a 70,000 USD dollars prize pool. Therefore, the Showcase Qualifier certainly has some nice stakes in it. It's also a small field, only 25 players were qualified this time, so a little bit different than your typical weekend challenge on Magic Online. For this tournament I chose to play Dredge. Now why did I choose to play Dredge? I'm mostly comfortable playing Dredge in shops, as those are the archetypes that I enjoy the most in Vintage. I typically avoid playing the blue decks, I don't find them as fun, so I just have more experience with Bazaar of Baghdad because of that. I don't consider shops to be that great for the most part, although of course it depends on the build. I don't like shops for the past year or maybe two, mostly since Force of Vigor got released. So that left me with Bazaar of Baghdad decks. I was pretty comfortable locking myself somewhat early onto Dredge. Dredge was a deck I qualified for the Showcase Qualifier too, so of course that played into the decision too. Now, the version of Dredge that I ended up registering had some the night before technology introduced, because I sat there and thought about what I disliked about my traditional Bazaar decks. Now, for those who are maybe less familiar with Vintage, I'm going to quickly go over the main strategy of Bazaar of Baghdad Dredge in Vintage. So, of course, the namesake card, Bazaar of Baghdad, a land with no mana abilities, tap, draw 2 cards and discard 3 cards. Now, normally wouldn't be very good, but it's really good with the Dredge mechanic. You get to activate it first, discard your Dredges, and then you just tap it and mill 10, 11, maybe somewhat less cards. And from there, you use cards that work from your graveyard at no cost, Narcomoebas, Price Amalgams, Bloodgas, Icorids. Bloodgas is actually the less common one, I'll talk about it in a minute. Quickly, people use Bridge from Below too, in conjunction with Cabal Therapy, letting you produce multiple zombies after sacrificing Narcomoebas, etc. This deck is also playing Serum Powder. Serum Powder is a weird card. Anytime you could mulligan and Serum Powder is in your hand, you may exile all the cards from your hand and draw that many cards. Effectively lets you mulligan more times. Given that this deck is, we could say, the most focused on a single task that any deck in competitive Magic ever is. Serum Powder in conjunction with London Mulligan lets you find Bazaar every single game, because you do need it every single game. There's one rule that you abide to when mulliganing. It is to always keep with Bazaar of Baghdad in your opening hand, even if you have to mulligan to 1 card. You're just doing that. Now, ever since London Mulligan, you actually don't have to mulligan all that often, even if you're going to get to keep 5, 6, 7 cards even. And your overall chances, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but they are probably in the 99% range of finding the card. Besides Bazaar, Serum Powder to find it, the Dredges to fill your graveyard, the graveyard payoffs, you also get to play some extra cards, mainly spend on free interaction. Force of Will is a great card in Vintage. Your blue count is not that high typically in Dredge. It's not a problem, because you get to see a larger portion of your deck with Bazaar of Baghdad, and it's also not a big deal if it's dead. You can always discard a dead card to your Bazaar of Baghdad, but the ceiling, the upside of being able to counter spells for free is very strong. Mental Misstep, also a free counter spell. Noxious Revival is a card I chose for my 0-mana interaction. Its main utility is to be able to counter your opponent's Wasteland effects. Wasteland is a card that's spotted against Bazaar of Baghdad, well, because it's a land and you want Bazaar in play. So having Noxious Revival to buy it back, even at the cost of a draw step, is worth it, because Bazaar is that important. Nicely, it's also a green card to push to Force of Vigor in possible games, but a little bit minor. Spends 2 extra main deck slots on Leyline of the Void, which is valuable against a lot of decks in Vintage currently. Part of the reason for that is because the blue decks moved from the most common blue decks, bluish combo decks, let's say, are no longer Paradoxical Outcome, but Underworld Breach, so they are getting hosed by Leyline of the Void. They can't combo you off if you Leyline them, so pretty good there. My specific build was also a little bit weaker in the mirror match, so I wanted to hedge for that a little bit by including 2 Leylines in the main deck. Sometimes you get to see that your opponent use a Serum Powder when mulliganing, so you can even in a closed decklist environment, you get to utilize that information in game 1 sometimes and just steal a game. Strip Mine Wasteland, pretty effective against everybody, but mainly against the mirror match. On top of that, having some extra lands to trigger Bloodgust was also a consideration when I decided to include those 2. Hollow One's the extra card that's played in all the Bazaar decks ever since it was released. It's really good as it's a threat that doesn't rely on graveyard at all. I think you win games through it much more easily. Now, the way in which my Dredge deck differs from the, let's say, more typical builds is the inclusion of Bloodgust. Traditionally, those spots are occupied by Bridge from Below. Until recently, Creeping Chill was also not really played. It was instead those slots were occupied by Dread Return and like 1 or 2 animation targets, Namekin Zealot, Dragon Lord, Kolakan, Hellish Norn. There were plenty of different targets that you could choose depending on what you wanted to do with those Dread Return targets. But the general issue with those cards is that while both Bridge from Below and Dread Return are more powerful in general and let your Dredge deck do more powerful things, go over the top of all the bearish blue decks, shop decks in the format, they are really much worse at fighting through hate. And that is a problem, especially post-spawn. Given that by its nature, the Dredge deck is really good at beating basically everybody who doesn't have hate, you have some leeway here. By going with Creeping Chill and Bloodgusts, there is slightly less power in the deck, but there is still enough power to be able to comfortably beat most of the other archetypes in the format. Therefore, I reached into my memory and I thought about how I actually lose with Dredge. What are the most common ways I lose with Dredge? Turns out that those are the games where I lose my Bazaar of Baghdad, frequently game 1 to Wasteland effects. That makes me not win. And then I also lose to hate, including Tabernacle at Penrell. The Tabernacle at Penrell, recently a very popular hate card against Dredge. It kind of rose to popularity over the course of the last year or so. Very frequently played by all the blue decks and different decks in general in their sideboards and vintage. It's very effective against Bridge from Below, rendering it nearly useless. Now, between Echorids, Creeping Chills, Bloodcasts, and even the occasional mana that I get from Darkmoor Salvage, I was very well equipped to combat Tabernacle. Because both Echorids, Bloodcasts have haste, Creeping Chills deal damage through that. You can just play a longer game, you can just deal your opponent damage continuously and basically ignore Tabernacle, which is really convenient. The other upside is that in games in which you get interacted with, by disrupt the interaction or not, basically when you dredge over some scraps, when you dredge over only a few cards, like you only get 1 Bazaar activation or maybe even 0 Bazaar activations, you have to go with manual dredges after your Bazaar of Baghdad got destroyed. It's much easier to get into a winning board state, maybe getting a Bloodgust into returning Price Amalgam rather than trying to combine Bridge from Below with some other cards, because then you have like a lot of cards that rely on other cards to even do anything. So I found Bloodgust to be much more effective against hate. For those reasons, I chose to build this deck the way I did. Now, there is of course still a lot of things that are up in the air. I was really happy with Noxious Revivals as a way to protect me from Wastelands, as I described before. I was really happy with some other choices. I was pretty lukewarm about playing Wastelands Strip Mine. I was not entirely sure about the exactly correct number of dredgers. Golgari Grave Troll is restricted, Dredge is the most, it's the best. Then Stinkweed Imp is the best non-restricted dredger, so of course you play 4. Then you have Golgari Thag, which dredges the next biggest number. You would like to play it, but on the other hand, Shambling Shell, while it dredges 1 card less, it's also a green card to fish to Force of Vigor. There are upsides and downsides, and to support Bloodgas, I obviously need to play some lands. Dagmar Salvage comes to the rescue, as it's a land that you can always find over when you're milling your graveyard. I was not sure if I should play 2 or 3 Dagmar Salvages. I researched some older decks from Vintage that used to play Bloodgas in the past. They frequently only play 2 Dagmar Salvages. I was a little bit afraid of maybe powdering them away or not finding it in time, so I decided to run 3 for safety. In the sideboard I have some more free interaction to basically exchange with what you have with some of the payoffs. Depending on what you anticipate your opponent's ways to stop you are going to be. Wastelands mainly shine against the mirror match. Fossil Figure comes in against Lane of the Void, which nearly everyone plays, so basically in every single game. More ley lines for the mirrors, Ravenous Trap also for the mirrors, Sickening Shawl, the way to answer Silent Jailer and Containment Priest. Unmask and Mindbreak Trap are the cards that I like against combo decks. There's plenty of other cards that I wanted to play, that I maybe should have played, some amounts in the main deck in the sideboard, I was not sure. Chalice of the Void is a card that's pretty good, you can play it on 0 to counter your opponent's mana, pretty decent against combo, pretty decent against shops. Mostly on the play. Unmask I like a lot, but it's also Vintage is so fast paced that it's only really good on the play, and given that you by default assume that you're going to win most of the game once, you do get 1 game on the play in the sideboard, but that means that the sideboard slot is maybe not the most effectively used if it's only good in that 1 game. Mindbreak Traps are a way to stop combo decks. I thought about Force of Negation too, it's a fine card, you can find space. Not sure about some of the minute details. Alright, that's the deck, that's the general strategy, and let's go to the matches. Alright, on the play, and is near perfect. Just like a hollow one maybe. Activate Bazaar of Baghdad, pretty obvious discards here. I get to keep 2 forces and a strip mine. Great. And unfortunately, I get wastelanded here. My opponent tries my Bazaar, which means that I will probably need to get there with manual dredges while forcing their 2 of their spells and destroying their land. So that is my plan so far. I plan to go on with the manual dredges, which is where having Bloodgas over bridges, I think, is gonna help me. Given that my plan is to deal scraps of damage, I don't want to force a Mana Crypt, because I might rely on the Mana Crypt damage that my opponent's gonna take to close out the game. For the same reason, I actually forced the Ravager. Just for Ravager can sacrifice a Crypt at any point. The first Dredge did not yield too much. I have another Icorid, I have a Dagmar Salvage. Decide to keep the strip mine in hand, not to expose it to yet another wasteland effect if my opponent has that. So that if they play Mishra's Workshop or something like that, we get to wasteland this and get them off of a larger amount of mana. They do in fact have the Workshop, so you could say I got paid off for that. Now in this spot, I tanked a lot. I decided not to bring my Icorids, and I think that was a mistake. Given that my graveyard did not contain Dredgers, what I should have done, I should have exiled 1 Icorid to bring back the other and use Cabal Therapy on myself, discarding Stink with him, to make sure that my Dredgers are gonna be fueled. I got fortunate and I milled the single Golgari Grave Troll instead, so better lucky than good, but I think that was a slight mistake. I did not consider that possibility. Here I choose not to bring back the Icorids again, maybe waiting for the time when I have 2 other black creatures to exile them. It was pretty close, like I get a limited amount of Icorid users anyways, so I was not sure if I should try to go convert them into damage as soon as possible, or maybe try to get the biggest use out of all of them. In the meanwhile, my opponent is taking some heavy damage from the mana crypt. During turn 4, I believe they took damage from it either twice or 3 times already, which was really helpful for me, getting me one of the scraps. Now I decided to pick up my Incorrect this turn. The reason is that it might force my opponent to block with their land, which means that they're gonna have even less resources to play more cards, especially if they fear Mana Crypt dealing the last damages to them. Might be important if their out is, let's say, Walking Ballista, to pick my Narcomoebas. If I bring them down to 5, that means that if they lose their Mana Crypt flip, they are actually dead to the Narcomoeba. If they win it, then they are within Creeping Chill's range. I lost again, 3 or 4 flips lost, and I get to win, regardless of my bazaar getting destroyed. Leyline has no utility against shops. Scanning show is okay, just play creatures so you can hit them. Cover therapy is not very good, given that I don't play bridge from below. I don't have to consider that in the equation, as I don't need a sacrifice outlet to trigger my bridge. Obviously I want Fossil Vigor for 8 pieces. Unmask, I didn't want to bring it on the draw. I would like it a lot more on the play. First opening hand, no bazaar, mulligan. On 6 cards, mulligan. 5 cards, mulligan. And on 4 cards I see Hollow One and a Dredger and a bazaar. That's fine enough. I won't be able to use Sickening Shoal on that few cards, so I choose to put it back. Fallen Amethyst typically means that you won't be able to interact with your opponent anymore when you're playing Dredge, but that's actually not the case for my deck, as Darkmoor Salvage lets me pay for the tax effects, the spears. So I keep Darkmoor Salvage, Force of Vigor to be able to draw a green card to destroy my opponent's stuff, and I play a Hollow One. I hope for the best. We don't have much going on against a Leyline, obviously. Remove going to 4, but honestly, for those conditions, our spot doesn't look the worst. Opponent has to take 4 damage to play this Wandering Spectre. Distinguished Imp is a useless draw. I decide not to use Bazaar and play my Darkmoor Salvage, so that I can pay for the Thorn of Amethyst. Next turn, I'm going to have 3 cards, so I can Bazaar or pack that into a green card and use Force of Vigor. Then goes to 6 to play the Ballista. So now their life roll is actually really low. Drain Narcomoeba, which is useless. And I see more useless cards. I decide to keep the Distinguished Imp and Force of Vigor, because in that way, if I draw a green card, I have both Force of Vigor to destroy Leyline and a Dredger to start performing actions again. A second Bazaar would be nice. It kind of pains to discard it as a wasteland protection, but actually that might have been close. I think that might have been a mistake too. I think it's possible that in this spot, discarding the second Bazaar was a mistake over discarding the Distinguished Imp, as 2 Bazaars also let me dredge through my deck at a much faster rate, even if I start without a Dredger. Well, now I'm failing to find anything relevant while my opponent attacks me with the Walking Ballista. We find Wasteland, but they decide to tap it, to play Wurmcoil Engine, and this is actually interesting because that now throwing a green card that leaves him with an out. I thought I was pretty dead to the Wasteland. They didn't activate it. They played the Ballista, and now that I've thrown the green card, that means that I actually have a single dredge activation to find Creeping Chill, as I'm going to be able to use Force of Vigor on Leyline of the Void and Wormhole Engine whilst attacking, not letting my opponent gain the lifelink life, while I get to pick up Stinkweed from my graveyard once. Now, to actually do this, I need to perform a small trick. I need to hold priority, activate Bazaar of Baghdad, and in response to that, cast Force of Vigor. If I do it differently, if I just cast Force of Vigor, my opponent gets an opportunity to target my Bazaar of Baghdad with Wasteland, and I don't have an opportunity to put the Stinkweed Imp into my graveyard actually, because it would be exiled by Leyline of the Void. So it's pretty important to do it this way, this scenario. Wasted. I get my Dredge. I fail. I do not find a Creeping Chill. Now my out is to find 2 Creeping Chills, because the Worm is gonna gain 3 extra life for my opponents. It's gonna be pretty hard to do now. The long pause that I had my draw step and the start I had my draw step in general kinda tells me that they might have been just holding a Ravenous Trap all along. But I played towards my out, I didn't hit this. Overall, it was quite an interesting game for what it was, I think. My opponent plays a Archon Ravager, and there's one card in hand. I can't really have anything. They know I'm dead to the Ballista, and they move the counters onto the Ballista. On the play, I change Sickening Shoal to Unmask. I think Unmask is much more important, because if you kill their creatures with Sickening Shoal, it's only for combat, also like minor value. It's not often gonna be very important. It's not like their creatures are 8 pieces, they're just creatures, power and toughness. Unmask lets me see, especially if my opponent is playing Ravenous Trap, or Surgical Extraction, which seemed like they could from their behavior. I powder my first hand and powder into another powder hand, Bazaar, Hollow One, Force of Will, extra blue cards for the Dredger, so hoping my Bazaar activation is going to yield me something good. Even if my opponent moves to Leyline, we can win with Hollow One plus Force of Will, and we have a pretty big hand to sculpt it, because we didn't mulligan too far. My opponent mulligan to 5, they didn't put a Leyline to play. I assume they have some other kind of hate pieces in their hand then. I get to find another blue card to pitch to Force, which is great. Wasteland is good. 2 Icarus and Stinkweed Imp into my graveyard. I pass. They play Ancient Tube, Moxjet, Black Lotus, and for a total of 6 mana they play Wormhole Engine down to 2 cards in hand. No Wasteland, no Graveyard Hate, like that's seemingly all of their mana powered into this Wormhole Engine. I'm really happy to see that, because they spend a lot of resources on the Wormhole and I get to hate on that. I get to stop that with that Force of Will. Now, to play a little bit about that Ravenous Trap that I suspected my opponent had at this point, given various tells both in the previous game and the fact that they paused a little bit at my end step on turn 1, I chose to bring back an Ichorid, and only then I go heavy on dredging, so that I have an extra Ichorid left in my graveyard if they decide to Ravenous Trap me. Turns out they did have a Ravenous Trap, so get that 1 extra Ichorid, 3 damage plus the Ichorid back in my graveyard, pretty nice. I draw Wasteland. Well, I play my Wasteland, waste my opponent's land. They have 2 cards in hand only right now, so there is not much I can do, and I can replenish my graveyard with another treasure. Well, very chill. Attack them for 7 again, I go to 1, and there is virtually no top decks that I can draw. Probably, depending on what's in their hand, but it seems like probably have some uncastable artifacts. That would be actually pretty bad at letting them catch up. And that's it. That's this way we win round 1 of the showcase. Match 2 on the play. No Bazaar, mulligan. This is a very good 6, 2 Bazaars, Hollow One. This is a small Dredger. Hands like this I like to put back Creeping Chill. It's like first priority, because You don't shuffle in this deck, there is no shuffle effect, so when you mulligan and put a card on the bottom of your deck, it's always gonna stay there. Narcomoeba milled as you deck out is useless. Creeping Chill milled as your last card can be life-saving. Now I drew more Creeping Chills, which is really unfortunate, means that I won't be able to deal much direct damage this game, but it could be important, could be whatever. I obviously dredge my upkeep. I did mention it earlier, but that's the typical play pattern that you want to dredge in the upkeep so that you make sure that you can use the Bazaar discard ability to discard the Dredger, the biggest Dredger, back to your graveyard after dredging it, so that your draw step yields the biggest dredge too. You care about the more dredged cards immediately. I decided to cast Cover Therapy, as it should not affect the clock, and my opponent spared me the agony of having to choose a name, but had I had to choose a name for Therapy here, I would have gone with Underworld Breach, as that's the card that could possibly be in their deck and could kill me from this spot somewhat easily. Frankly, I still don't really know what archetype, what kind of a blue deck they are playing exactly, but I am guessing that most likely gonna be Breach. Or rather, in game 1, it's the most fearsome if they have some kind of a combo in there. I attack first because I know I won't be able to mail down to like the last card in my deck to attack them with the Bloodgust this turn, so it doesn't matter. With my third Bazaar and flip half of my deck, intending to get more therapies, actually some cards in their hands and be locked for a win on the next turn. Fighting for a great top deck. They concede, so. Now, the convenient thing in my build is that I don't actually need to keep Wasteland Strip Mine against blue decks that might sideboard Tabernacle against me, because I can easily beat Tabernacle with my regular plan. That means that sideboarding is quite a bit easier, and I typically don't find Wastelanding blue lands 1-for-1 to be particularly effective strategy, so I'm happy that thanks to Bloodgust I can do that. In the dark I poured in Force of Vigor. It's gonna be good against Lane of the Void. Nearly every deck plays Lane of the Void nowadays, so I'm expecting to see that. I'm also bringing in Masks as a generic interaction. I end up trimming 1 Noxious Survival, 1 Price Amalgam. Price Amalgam, the weakest graveyard payoff, as it's reliant on your other payoffs the most. Noxious Survival, typically not gonna be great against a ATP blue deck, just as a pitch to force. No Bazaar, mulligan. My 6 is good. Bazaar, Hollow 1. Doesn't have interaction for Leyline, but Hollow 1 can get there sometimes. My opponent mulligans to 5, presents no Leyline in their opening hand, so pretty happy about that. Unfortunately, their first play is to cast Ancestral Recall, which means that they basically unmulligan from 5 to 7 cards, so I'm less happy about that. Lotus Petal means that they are more combo-like. They're, you know, Underground Sea plus Lotus Petal. That's assuredly Breach by now, we know that. I draw a big Dredger. It might be a little bit debatable as to if I should discard Blackmore Salvage or Bloodgust, or maybe if I should keep the Price Amalgam if I'm gonna take natural draws for Force of Will, maybe. I chose to discard Imp Amalgam Bloodgust, which in fact I think was a mistake, because that play plays around Wasteland, destroying my Bazaar, not letting me discard cards anymore. I think I should discard the Blackmore Salvage, maybe keep the Amalgam in my hand, in the case I need to draw Force of Will. They play a Graveyard Hate card. Now here we have a nice play. My opponent end of turn sacrifice a petal to cast Vampiric Tutor to find some presumably very scary card. And with Noxious Revival, I basically get to undo their Vampiric Tutor, putting the Vampiric Tutor on the top of their deck again. So I feel pretty smart in the moment, but you know, my opponent plays a Time Walk and undoes my Noxious Revival in response. Turns out that the card they searched for was Xylee Jailer, and now they also have a now they have Xylee Jailer that I can answer. I didn't board my Sickening Shoals, not expecting the card. And on top of that, they have a Vampiric Tutor, which I can use to tutor for another powerful card. Here I draw Force of Will, potentially slightly punished for not keeping Price Amalgam in my hand as a Force of Will pitch. Because my plan right now is to go the distance with this Hollow One, which is of course not gonna be easy, but well, that's the only plan I've got right now. Keep Force of Will, Kawa Therapy, play Dagmo Salvage. Dagmo Salvage in play lets me hardcast the Therapy, not that important, and lets me play around Tabernacle at Penderwell, slightly more important. They play their Vampiric Tutor, find a card, draw it immediately with Preordain, and cast it on the Hollow One. Here, I actually get punished for discarding the Price Amalgam 2 turns ago, which is something that I did not notice as I was playing the game at all. But I think, of course, my opponent also had the opportunity not to play the Shattering Spree immediately. They could have took 4 more damage and then maybe replicated, which I have no way of stopping then. But against their exact play, if I had a force here, I could have forced it, and then it would be in a much more precarious situation. A Hollow One versus the Xylee Jailer. Hollow One killing them in 3 attacks, them drawing 1 card per turn. Would actually add up. As it is, I have a very scarce outs. Need to draw another Hollow One and then also need to get there, which is a tough ask. I keep Bloodgust in my hand because there is also the like super backwards out of drawing second Dagmo Salvage, playing it, and then having Bloodgust play. But that of course lies on my opponent having nothing ever. Turns out that in Mystic Sanctuaries era, even if you draw nothing, just lands, then those lands let you rebuy Ancestral Vehicle, so that's probably good enough for my opponent here. It's still very useful that we get to learn that they have Piffing Needle in their sideboard. I still wouldn't cut my Force of Vigors, obviously, as I still expect them to have Leylines, etc. But it's better to know about the needle than it is not to know about the needle. Under the Narset, just mostly with the goal of seeing more cards at this point. And finally, I get to die to Underworld Breach. This time for sure confirming that that's the archetype that we are facing off against. Finally, after the flurry of more or less important actions, I get to take under draw and draw Serum Powder. Dying to the Xylee Jailer beats as I was unable to remove that creature. I draw an Unmask. This is why I didn't concede too. I draw an Unmask, I cast it, exiling Bloodgust to maybe see their hand, to learn a bit more about what's in their deck. I see Repeal, a card that I would not have guessed what's in their deck, so useful to know. So now you have Xylee Jailer. Presumably not too many, presumably you just have one or maybe two at best, probably using different cards as their main hit cards. Or at least hopefully, as it's kind of hard for my build to answer creatures, as people typically don't turn into creatures as their anti-dredge cards. Mostly because they cost mana, as opposed to Leyline, Tormod Script, other effects. And yeah, go down on green cards in Noxious Revivals. Just making sure that I have the Sickening Shoals available for a post-board game. My opening hand has a Fossil Vigor, Bazaar, pretty good. We don't have a green card to pitch, but we have extra looks of Bazaar, so even if they open the Leyline, they need to try to draw it. Always nice to start with a 7-card hand, as you also get to use Bazaar many more times to find the useful cards. Well, move on to 6 and did put a Leyline of Void into play. Always a sad thing to happen when you are the Dredge player. Activate Bazaar, I immediately see a green card for Force of Vigor. That's pretty nice. I discard Bloodcast, Tachmon Salvage, Icorid. So that I can keep Force plus a green card. I get to keep my biggest Dredger and I get to keep Force of Will. I don't want to keep Bloodcast over Tachmon Salvage, as that would mean that I only have one more Tachmon Salvage left in my deck. Now I could Vigor in my opponent's upkeep, but my opponent showed me that they had Pickling Needle in their deck, so I decided against that. As they could have just played a 10-1 Pickling Needle then on my Bazaar, and that would be really bad for me too. So the play Moxora being to a Sprite Dragon. I Vigor in response, telling them not to cast anything. I'm right, they don't even have a Force, so they can't. They don't protect, and we're playing a game. Around 3 cards, 1 land, 1 Sprite Dragon. Overall, be fine. I drew a Force of Will and a blue card for Force, so that is really nice. The Sprite Dragon could be a problem, but realistically, it's pretty hard for the Sprite Dragon to raise the entire Dredge deck, especially with the introduction of Creeping Chill. As you see right now, I'm at 22 life versus 17, so that does already puts me at a advantage. Play Tabernacle, which means that I would need to pay for the Sprite Dragon. They played the Tabernacle pre-combat, which was a mistake for them. I wouldn't have blocked the Sprite Dragon with an Narcomoeba probably as a 2-2. I would have lost my Narcomoeba to the Tabernacle. So I got to save 2 damage for free. Reanimate Icorid, pick up the thing with the Imp, and get ready to hit them, chilling with a Force. So far I leave my Tachmon Salvage in my graveyard. It only dredges 2. I don't have any Bloodghasts. Once I will see Bloodghast in the graveyard, I will pick it up. There is a certain tension, level of awkwardness with that, but minor. Interestingly, they value their mana more than they value their Sprite Dragon. They land and they play a Xylee Jailer. I force that, hoping that their last 2 cards are not a blue card and a Force. And very sad, because they actually are. That means that my graveyard is blank now. I also milled one of my Sickening Shoals, meaning that I literally only have 1 Sickening Shoal in my deck to draw to answer the Xylee Jailer. They have no cards. They have a clock in the Xylee Jailer. They have to pay for it every single turn, which helps them a little bit, but they draw a card every turn, and the card they draw immediately is Pickling Needle. It's kind of spooky. It means that I won't even be able to find my responses that easily. Here I choose to keep the Stink with the Imp in my hand as a black card to pitch to Sickening Shoal. Now I think that might have been a slight mistake too. The biggest dredger in my graveyard currently is Tachmon Salvage. So it's possible I was supposed to keep the Bloodghast or the Icorid in my hand and put the bigger dredger for if I happen to draw Sickening Shoal to be able to actually manually dredge into anything, as without Bazaar available, thanks to Pickling Needle, even if I find the answer to Xylee Jailer, it's not gonna be a trivial game to win. Opponent's drawing some lands, playing some lands. They don't have Sanctuary available yet, at least. They don't have great Sanctuary targets in the graveyard yet, so well, they have time. But I'm already writing this game off and thinking that I'm probably gonna lose. Every draw so they take also gets them closer to force of, well, being able to protect the Xyli Jailer. I draw a card, and it actually is the Sickening Shoal. Now, that's pretty poggers, I would say. I get to exile a black card from my hand to give the Xyli Jailer -X/-X. I choose to move to my opponent's upkeep, so they have to pay for the Tabernacle tax. And then I cast a Sickening Shoal. I'm not really expecting it to resolve yet, like I don't want to get too ahead of myself and be happy. I have to choose a card to pitch. The best card to pitch probably Ink Shell, although it's not much different than pitching Cabal Therapy. Given that my Bazaar is not active, I probably won't get to discard the cards in my hand. Cabal Therapy is occasionally castable with Dagmar Salvage, so that's the reason to actually keep it in hand. They draw, they fetch, and they play Sprite Dragon, followed by a Lotus Petal. Now with my graveyard actually active, I get to do things. Unfortunately, there's not that much I can do. I do bring the Ikorid though and pick up the Dagmar Salvage to be able to return my Bloodgust. I mill over a Stickwind Imp, so not punished for that, actually rewarded for that discard a few turns ago, where I put both Bloodgust and Ikorid into my graveyard. Now this is an interesting play, and we'll see in a minute. My opponent decided to pay for the Sprite Dragon, meaning that they go down to 3 available mana, but they get to keep the Sprite Dragon. Now, I actually choose to. Now that I think about this in this moment, I should have thought about this probably previously in the game. I only thought about this in this moment as to whether I should pay for the Bloodgust or not, because there's an argument for not paying for the Cabal Therapy, being able to Cabal Therapy either myself or my opponent. Now, if I Cabal Therapy my opponent, what do I even name? Those are all pretty valid questions, and we'll see in a moment. I choose not to pay for anything, and only to get my Ikorid back. I also don't really want to pay for the Bloodgust just to attack with it and have it be destroyed by the Sprite Dragon blocking my opponent as an instant of sorts. Granted, they probably don't have an instant. They had a cantrip, even if it was a Brainstorm, they would have casted that Sorcerer Speed, most likely. Not over an extra therapy, so I get to name them twice, or even 3 times. So I cast the therapy on them to look at their hand, and I see it instantly resolves. And I think, what cards do actually make sense in my opponent's hand? And in the moment I think that actually Leyline of the Void makes sense. And I hit 3. Now the weird thing here is that on the previous turn, my opponent was capable of not paying for the Sprite Dragon, letting it die, and hardcasting a Leyline using a Lotus Petal land. Of course, that puts them in a pretty rough spot, because they don't get to block anymore and they die in 2 turns to my Ikorid plus Bloodgust most likely. So they chose to keep the Sprite Dragon, block the Bloodgust instead. See, like, seeing 3 Leyline was pretty like funny. I didn't expect 3. We have like, actually had like somewhat maybe of a misunderstanding, because the way I responded probably made my opponent think that I was being defensive at the lore, but I was actually meant to lore with them, because I also like didn't expect 3 of them, and it was pretty funny when I seen all 3 of them and discarded all 3. I chose to flashback therapy on myself, discarding the 2 Stinging Imps to have a big dredge on the next turn. Pay for the dragon. This is in the chat. I have chosen to include an XT at the end of my message to make it clear to my opponent that I had positive intentions, a common tactic. You throw your land, they have no cards in hand. I exile Shining Shell, summon an Ikorid. Dredge over an Imp, hit the Living Chill, and that's lethal. Which means that I managed to draw my 1-outer of Sickening Shoal and convert it into a win. You all.